Доброго дня, друзі! Наш брифінг.
Good afternoon, friends. Our briefing is devoted to exposing the fakes and propaganda of the aggressor state. Thus, Russian propagandists are trying to convince the whole world that the food crisis is not caused by the war that Russia unleashed against Ukraine, but by allegedly anti-Russian sanctions. This is reported by Russian state propaganda resources, including Russia Today. The anti-Russian sanctions have provoked the largest food crisis in Europe since World War II, Russia Today wrote. Actually, the food crisis is caused by the fact that due to the war unleashed by Russia against Ukraine, 22 million tons of last year's harvest remain blocked on the territory of Ukraine. This was stated by President Zelensky addressing Indonesian experts on Friday, and Russia's desire to blame Ukraine for a future crisis once again leads to another propaganda story which they are trying to spread, demanding the lifting of sanctions against Russia in exchange for unblocking the ports. So this is a typical pattern of behavior of a terrorist state, taking the whole world hostage, which will suffer from a food crisis. They want to solve their narrow problem, sanctions, which in turn were imposed on Russia because of the aggressive war against Ukraine. The topic of food security was the focus of many speeches during this week's World Economic Forum in Davos, in Switzerland. It was not held in winter, but in spring, because of the coronavirus pandemic, and Russia did not participate in the forum in any form. But in order not to look like a state outcast with whom no one wants to sit at the same table, Russia organized its own forum in parallel. This means that it uses the technology of reflection in a certain way. And at this forum, Russia gathered with its economic satellites. It was called the Eurasian Economic Forum, where Putin spoke personally. Meanwhile, false theories continued to spread in Russia that they attacked Ukraine because of its alleged desire to attack Russia or satellite formations of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. These are so-called republics, which have been supported by the Russian state since their formation. This was stated personally by Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in an interview with Russia Today, which was broadcasted in Arab countries. What we found in the positions of the Ukrainian army confirms that we barely made it in time with the operation, which began on February the 24th. By mid-February, a huge group of the armed forces of Ukraine was already based on the line of contact with Donbass. They planned to simply seize these territories by force. Another lie of an official of the aggressor state. Ukraine did not plan any attacks on Russia or the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. The gathering of troops was a reaction on Russia's own preparations for war against Ukraine, and in particular the attack on the territories of Donbass that were not occupied then. Another lie was broadcast on the federal channel Russia 24 by the so-called spokesman of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic, Rodion Miroshnik. By the way, in the past, he was a spokesman for Yanukovych. He stated that refrigerators with the bodies of the dead allegedly traveling through the territory controlled by Ukraine in order to stage crimes. As a person who is a member of the supervisory board of Ukrzaliznytsia, I would like to inform you that there are refrigerators with the bodies of dead Russian servicemen on the territory of Ukraine. On the day of this briefing, there are 320 bags with bodies that are in refrigerators at 4 railway stations. Half of them are located at the Kyiv station, Kyiv-Volyn. The rest are in Zaporizhia, Kharkiv and Dnipro. They have been there for more than a month, and Ukraine, as a country that adheres to international obligations, spends, among other things, diesel fuel to cool refrigerators containing the bodies of Russian soldiers, whom Russia itself is not going to take away for 3 months. And these bodies are not buried by the state that sent these soldiers to Ukraine for death. Once again, we call on the Russian leadership to treat its own victims with respect and to remove them from the Ukrainian territory. They are not a necessity for us. Meanwhile, in its propaganda of war, the aggressor state has reached the point of absurdity. Thus, one of the spokesmen for this war is the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill. He began to justify the crimes of his own state to the whole world. He is followed by Dmitry Peskov and Maria Zakharova and other Russian officials who claim that Russia has not attacked anyone. Kirill has now come up with a similar thesis. He said that Russia was allegedly defending its own territory. The great and mighty country has never attacked anyone. It has simply defended its territory, said Kirill, reaffirming that Russia is using all possible arsenals of lies to propagate this war, including church leadership. Another example of the use of reflection technology by Russia is the alleged release of the stamp in the DPR. It is clear that this stamp is a response to the fact that in Ukraine, in a very large request, are stamps dedicated to the cruiser Moskva and the Zmyny Island. This week, the second stamp, Russian warship is over, was released in order to somehow change Russia's attention to launch this stamp dedicated to it and launch this stamp dedicated to it, as they call Nazism in Ukraine. Of course, this stamp uses a symbol of the war, the letter Z. Russia constantly uses similar technologies when they have a lack of arguments for their own propaganda. Russia continues to use children's images to justify an aggressive war. Remember the boy Alyosha, who in Belgorod region runs out and meets with applause and waving his hands at Russian armored vehicles, which are moving in the direction of Ukraine. The guy was filmed by Russian state propagandists. He became a meme in Russian propaganda channel Telegrams. Now his image was placed on a chocolate wrapper. In particular, this chocolate was made in Belgorod. Pilot's helmet, military greeting, and lilac were painted, informs the state Russian propaganda channel 7x7. The only thing that can be advised by Russian propagandists is, if you are lying, at least not so loudly. On this chocolate bar, they really depict a boy, but he was not in the helmet of a pilot, but of a tanker. I call all citizens both in Ukraine and abroad, do not believe the lies of the aggressor country, trust the Ukrainian official media, Ukrainian political leadership and the armed forces of Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
Керівництво. До зустрічі.